The moment my husband walked into that courtroom, he was already smiling like he had personally written the ending to our story. He leaned close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same brand I had bought him for his birthday 3 years in a row, and whispered, "You will walk out of here with absolutely nothing." Behind him, the woman he had been seeing laughed loudly enough that two people in the gallery turned around. I did not flinch, did not respond, did not even look in their direction. Instead, I reached into my briefcase, pulled out a single sealed envelope, and quietly passed it to my attorney with one simple instruction: give this to the judge when the moment is right. Less than 10 minutes later, the judge cracked that envelope open, read in silence for what felt like forever, and then looked up with an expression that emptied all the air out of the room. My name is Diane Calloway. I am 38 years old, and what happened inside that courtroom on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday morning was the conclusion of something that had been building for 15 years, through sacrifice, silence, and a kind of love that slowly teaches you the difference between devotion and disappearing. Before any of it makes sense, you have to go back to the beginning, back to when I was 23 years old, and completely convinced that belief in another person was the same as investing in yourself. Because for a long time, I honestly thought it was. I met Preston at a mutual friend's birthday gathering in the fall. He was charming in the way that people who have large dreams and very little else tend to be. He had a notebook full of ideas for a software company he wanted to launch, and exactly $0 in savings to make it happen. I had a steady accounting position, a one-bedroom apartment with furniture I had actually paid for, and a habit of seeing potential in people that I have since learned to examine more carefully. We clicked instantly. He made me laugh the way very few people ever had, and when he talked about what he wanted to build, there was a fire behind his eyes that made everything feel possible. We got married 2 years later, young and hopeful and absolutely certain we were doing the right thing. The plan we agreed on was straightforward. I would keep us financially stable while Preston focused on building his company from the ground up. Once things took off, we would enjoy everything together. It sounded reasonable, even romantic in a certain way. The kind of arrangement that makes sense when you are in love and have not yet learned that verbal agreements have a way of becoming invisible the moment circumstances change. But I believed in him. I genuinely, completely believed in him. And in those early years, that belief was not misplaced. The first several years were genuinely hard. There were months when the company brought in almost nothing. Preston would come home exhausted and discouraged, sitting at our kitchen table with his laptop open, and that haunted look that people get when they are pouring everything into something and wondering if it will ever pour back. I sat beside him on those nights. I refilled his coffee, talked through his ideas, reminded him why he had started in the first place. I worked overtime consistently. My paycheck covered our mortgage, our groceries, our utilities, our health insurance, and more than once, it covered direct expenses for the company when early investors backed out without warning. I refinanced my car to reduce our monthly costs. I postponed the graduate degree I had been planning since college. Every sacrifice felt like a deposit into a shared future, because that was exactly what Preston always called it. Then the 7th year happened, and everything shifted. One of his products broke through in a way nobody had predicted. Within 18 months, the company had expanded across multiple states, and Preston was being featured in industry publications, invited to conferences, recognized at dinners. I was proud of him. Watching someone you love achieve something they fought for is genuinely beautiful. And for a while I was able to hold on to that feeling without noticing what was quietly eroding underneath it. But the erosion was real. Conversations that used to be about us gradually became monologues about revenue projections and investor relationships. He stopped asking how my days had gone. When I finally brought up returning to graduate school, something I had been building toward for years, he barely glanced up from his phone before saying it seemed unnecessary at this point. The dismissal landed harder than he probably realized. The business trips became more frequent, evenings stretched into nights, weekends got canceled with apologies that started sounding rehearsed. Every time I raised a concern, it was handled with the same short toolkit: "You are overthinking. It is just work. You worry too much." I tried to believe him, because the alternative was something I was not ready to face. Then one afternoon, while sorting financial documents for our accountant, I came across hotel reservations that did not match any business calendar I had access to. I did not confront him, not then. Instead, I started paying attention in ways I never had before, and the picture that emerged was impossible to dismiss. Passwords appeared on devices that had never been locked. Messages were deleted within seconds of arriving. And then one evening I overheard a phone call he did not know I could hear. "I just need everything positioned correctly first," he said. "Then I will handle the divorce." That sentence rewrote everything. It was not the mention of divorce that devastated me. It was the word handle, like I was a situation requiring management rather than a person who had spent 15 years standing beside him. I sat in our living room alone that night, until the sun came up, not crying, just thinking. By morning, I had made a decision. If he had already decided how our story ended, then I was going to make sure the full story was told. I contacted an attorney named Sandra Fielding that same week. When she saw the folder I brought to our first meeting, nearly 3 inches of organized bank records, emails, tax returns, loan documents, and time-stamped receipts, she set down her pen and looked at me carefully. "How long have you been keeping records like this?" "Since the beginning," I told her. "I have always believed paperwork tells the truth that people sometimes choose not to." In the weeks leading up to the hearing, Preston assembled an expensive legal team. Mutual friends began reaching out to let me know what he was saying around town. Apparently the narrative he was building was simple. He built everything himself. She contributed nothing meaningful. She deserves nothing. I thanked people for calling, and said very little in response. I had learned something important during 15 years of managing finances. You do not need to argue with a story when you have documents that tell a different one. The morning of the hearing, Sandra straightened our files at the table, looked at me, and asked if I was ready. I looked toward the courtroom doors and told her the truth. "I stopped fighting a long time ago. I am just here for the truth." Preston arrived looking like he had never experienced a moment of doubt in his life. Expensive suit, relaxed posture. His girlfriend settled comfortably in the gallery behind him. He leaned over before proceedings began and told me I should have taken the settlement when he offered it. I said nothing. Then the judge entered, and the room stood, and I reached into my briefcase one last time. I passed the sealed envelope to Sandra with a quiet instruction, and she carried it to the clerk once the opening statements concluded. His attorney went first, framing the entire marriage as a story about one person's vision and another person's presence. Preston sat back and smiled at me while his attorney spoke, the same smile he had worn when he used to tell me everything we were building would belong to both of us. When Sandra stood, she did not raise her voice or challenge anyone directly. She simply walked the envelope to the judge and described it as a documented timeline, supported by materials already entered into discovery. The judge opened it methodically. The courtroom went quiet in the way rooms do when something is about to shift. I watched him read the first page, then the second, then returned to something midway through the first. He looked up once briefly, then continued. Preston crossed his arms and glanced at his girlfriend with an expression that said he was not concerned. He had not yet learned what I had spent months carefully organizing. The letter itself was not dramatic. There were no accusations, no emotional appeals, no flourishes. It was a chronological record. A specific date in early 2011, when I withdrew $28,000 from my personal savings to cover company payroll after investor funding collapsed, supported by matching bank statements. A date when I refinanced my own vehicle to reduce monthly overhead and redirect funds toward the business. Years of mortgage payments, insurance premiums, and utility bills paid exclusively through my income during periods when the company operated at a loss. And then the emails. The judge paused on one in particular. It was from Preston. "I could not have kept this company breathing without you. Everything we are building belongs to both of us." Another. "Thank you for covering the mortgage again this month." Another. "Every meeting I walk into is possible because you are holding everything else together." The silence in the room changed quality. The judge looked up at Preston and asked him directly about the $28,000 transfer, referencing his earlier statement that the business had been self-funded after its first year. His attorney leaned forward immediately. The judge waited. No satisfactory answer came. He continued through the financial exhibits with the patience of someone who had read thousands of documents and understood exactly what he was looking at. By the time he set the papers down and looked across the room, the confidence Preston had entered with was visibly gone. The judge announced that a full financial review would be conducted before any asset determination was made, thanked me specifically for the clarity of the timeline, and adjourned the session. 3 weeks later, the courtroom felt different. Preston arrived without the energy he had carried the first time. The review had covered everything: bank records, corporate filings, loan agreements, email archives, tax returns across 15 years. When the judge entered and delivered the court's findings, his language was measured and precise. The documented financial contributions were confirmed. Earlier statements regarding funding sources and household responsibilities were found to be incomplete. The marital assets would be divided according to verified financial records and applicable law. That was the whole of it. No theatrics. Just the truth, finally given the weight it deserved. When the room began to empty afterward, Preston stayed seated. His attorney collected files and stepped out. The woman from the gallery had already slipped through the door. For the first time in longer than I could remember, there was no performance happening, no strategy, no audience. He said my name quietly, and I stopped. He told me he had convinced himself that once the company succeeded, the years before it no longer counted. He said he had told himself he built everything alone because it was simpler than admitting how much of what he had built was only possible because of what I had given. He apologized. His voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. I listened without anger, because the anger had already finished its work inside me weeks earlier. I told him honestly that I had never helped him to earn recognition. I had helped him because I loved him, and that love had been real even if the partnership had not lasted. I wished him well and meant it, not because he had earned that grace, but because I was no longer willing to carry weight that belonged to the past. The settlement that followed was not extravagant. It was fair, which was all I had ever wanted. With my share, I did something I had postponed for nearly 15 years. I launched my own financial consulting firm, built specifically to help small family-owned businesses organize their records, plan for growth, and protect what they were building. The first client who sat across from me reminded me so much of who Preston and I had been at the beginning: young, hopeful, building something real, that I had to take a quiet breath before answering their first question. Only this time, I was not standing in the background of someone else's story. I was standing at the center of my own. People sometimes ask whether the outcome felt like victory. The honest answer is that it felt like clarity. I never walked into that courtroom wanting to destroy Preston or humiliate him in front of anyone. I walked in because 15 years of genuine contribution deserved to be seen. The judge read my letter, but the letter did not create my worth. It simply made visible what had always existed. And when I locked the door to my consulting office at the end of my first official day in business, I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and understood something I wished I had known much earlier. The most durable thing I ever built was not inside any courtroom, and it was not inside any marriage. It was the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I had always been capable of standing on my own. Some lessons cost everything. This one was worth it.